In the devastating aftermath of World War II, Germany lay in ruins. Cities once proud and magnificent had been reduced to mountains of rubble and debris. But from this apocalyptic landscape emerged an extraordinary group of heroes whose story has been largely overlooked in the grand narratives of history. They were the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women, who, armed with little more than determination and primitive tools, undertook the monumental task of rebuilding their shattered nation, brick by brick. Today, we explore their remarkable story of resilience, ingenuity, and collective strength in one of history's most challenging periods of reconstruction. The scale of destruction that faced Germany in 1945 is almost impossible to comprehend. Allied bombing campaigns had transformed urban centers into wastelands of brick and stone. An estimated 400 million cubic meters of rubble covered Germany, enough to build a wall 2 meters thick and 7 meters high around the entire country. Berlin, Dresden, Hamburg, once magnificent cities, now resembled lunar landscapes. The human toll was equally devastating. Most able-bodied men were dead, wounded, or imprisoned as POWs. Germany had lost nearly 7 million people during the war, leaving a population predominantly of women, children, and the elderly to face the daunting task of rebuilding from nothing. The work began almost immediately after Germany's surrender in May 1945. With the country divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the Americans, British, French, and Soviets, approaches to the rubble problem varied. But across all zones, one constant emerged. It was women who formed the backbone of the cleanup effort. Some were conscripted by occupation authorities. For many, clearing rubble was a prerequisite for receiving food ration cards in a time of severe hunger. Others volunteered out of a simple desire to rebuild their communities. These women, who would become known as the Trümmerfrauen, organized into brigades of 10 to 20 workers. They formed human chains through the ruins, passing bricks hand to hand to be cleaned, sorted, and repurposed. Their workday typically lasted 8 to 10 hours, regardless of weather conditions, through summer heat, autumn rain, and the bitter cold of German winters. What made the Trümmerfrauen phenomenon particularly remarkable was how it temporarily dissolved the social distinctions that had previously separated German society. Young women whose education had been interrupted by war worked alongside middle-aged housewives and elderly women who had already survived 2 world wars. Class, education, and political affiliation, distinctions that had once seemed so important, became meaningless in the rubble brigades. A former opera singer might work beside a factory worker, a university professor alongside a shopkeeper. They were united by the immediate task of creating order from chaos, of finding a path forward when the future seemed unimaginable. This breaking down of social barriers created unexpected communities among women who might never have interacted in pre-war Germany, forming bonds that would last long after the rubble was cleared. The occupation authorities approached the rubble problem through distinct lenses reflecting their political ideologies. In the American and British zones, women were often paid modest wages for their labor, though these amounts were largely symbolic given the collapsed German economy. In the Soviet zone, which would later become East Germany, the work was frequently framed as voluntary patriotic service to rebuild the socialist state. Soviet authorities emphasized collective effort and used the Trümmerfrauen as propaganda symbols of working-class resilience. The French occupation authorities were particularly stringent, establishing mandatory labor requirements for all women between 15 and 50. Despite these differences in administration, the fundamental experience of the Trümmerfrauen transcended zonal boundaries. It was grueling, dangerous work performed under conditions of severe material deprivation, with inadequate food, housing, and medical care. What makes the Trümmerfrauen phenomenon particularly remarkable was their sophisticated approach to material recycling during extreme resource scarcity. The women developed a methodical system for processing war debris that would impress modern sustainability experts. Bricks were meticulously cleaned of mortar using hammers and chisels, with each woman expected to clean 60 to 100 bricks per hour. These were sorted by quality and stacked for reuse. Metal was salvaged from the rubble and sent to factories. Even the mortar dust wasn't wasted. It was collected and mixed with sand to create new building material. The women developed specialized tools from scrap materials, including custom sieves to separate different grades of debris. This early form of urban mining and circular economy was born not from environmental consciousness, but from desperate necessity in a country where new materials simply didn't exist. In Berlin alone, an estimated 60,000 women processed roughly 7,000 cubic meters of rubble daily, allowing Germans to rebuild approximately 30% of their housing stock using reclaimed materials. The process required unexpected skills that transformed ordinary housewives into amateur engineers and logistics experts. Women who had never considered construction work quickly learned to distinguish between different building material types, assess structural integrity, and organize efficient workflows. They could identify which bricks were still usable and which were too damaged, which metal could be salvaged and which was beyond repair. They developed informal apprenticeship systems where experienced workers trained newcomers. The knowledge was primarily practical and transmitted through demonstration rather than formal instruction, creating a unique body of female-centered construction expertise that had no precedent in German society. These women became experts in urban demolition and material reclamation, developing techniques that would later be adopted by professional construction firms. Some Trümmerfrauen even participated in the planning stages of reconstruction, offering practical insights about material availability that shaped rebuilding decisions. The physical demands on these women were extreme and left lasting marks on many. They worked with the most primitive tools, pickaxes, hammers, and often their bare hands. Many Trümmerfrauen suffered from chronic respiratory problems due to the constant inhalation of limestone dust, which would later be recognized as a serious health hazard. Injuries were common: crushed fingers, back injuries, and accidents from unstable debris piles claimed lives and left many permanently disabled. The women worked without protective equipment, their only defense against the hazardous environment being cloth masks they sewed themselves. Perhaps more profound was the psychological dimension of their work. Many Trümmerfrauen were dismantling buildings where they had once lived or worked. Some uncovered human remains of neighbors or family members while clearing sites. The work represented both a confrontation with trauma and a form of processing grief. Survivors' accounts describe a complex emotional relationship with the rubble. It represented destruction, but also possibility, as each cleared site created space for something new. Despite these hardships, contemporary interviews reveal a surprising sense of camaraderie and purpose that emerged among the Trümmerfrauen. Women isolated by war and loss found community in the rubble brigades. Many described the work, despite its difficulty, as providing structure and meaning during a period of profound disorientation. They shared recipes for stretching meager rations, exchanged information about missing loved ones, and supported each other through illness and hardship. Impromptu celebrations marked milestones. Clearing a particularly difficult site might be commemorated with songs or a rare treat like real coffee shared among the brigade. Some women formed lifelong friendships in the rubble fields, relationships that would sustain them through the difficult decades of rebuilding that followed. This social dimension of the Trümmerfrauen experience created informal support networks that helped communities survive when formal institutions had collapsed. The daily routine of the Trümmerfrauen also represented a radical departure from traditional gender roles in German society. Women who had previously been defined primarily as mothers and homemakers now performed heavy manual labor in public spaces. They operated in an environment largely devoid of male supervision, developing their own leadership structures and decision-making processes. Women who had never been permitted to make significant decisions found themselves organizing complex logistical operations. This temporary inversion of gender norms would have lasting, if subtle, effects on German society, particularly in the East, where women's workforce participation became a central political principle. In West Germany, as men returned from prisoner of war camps, many women were expected to return to domestic roles, but the experience of independence and capability during the rubble years had changed their self-perception permanently. The Trümmerfrauen experience challenged assumptions about women's physical capabilities and leadership potential in ways that would influence gender relations for generations. The contribution of the Trümmerfrauen remained largely unacknowledged until the 1980s, when their story was rediscovered and incorporated into German national memory. Monuments now stand in several German cities, and their image has become a symbol of post-war resilience and reconstruction. However, historical research has complicated this narrative in recent decades. The significance and scale of women's rubble clearing work varied considerably between East and West Germany, and between different occupation zones. In West Germany, professional construction companies took over much of the debris removal by late 1946, while in Soviet-occupied East Germany, women's brigades continued working well into the 1950s. Some historians argue that the Trümmerfrauen narrative has been romanticized and exaggerated for political purposes, particularly in East Germany, where it fit neatly into socialist narratives about working-class heroism. Nevertheless, photographic evidence and contemporary accounts confirm that women did perform this crucial work during the immediate post-war period, when few alternatives existed, laying the literal groundwork for Germany's remarkable economic recovery. The contested memory of the Trümmerfrauen reflects broader tensions in how Germany has processed its wartime past. For some, they represent an apolitical symbol of renewal and resilience, conveniently separated from the Nazi era that created the destruction. For others, the focus on women's rebuilding efforts risks obscuring questions of responsibility for the war itself. This tension explains why the Trümmerfrauen achieved greater prominence in official memory in East Germany, where the state narrative emphasized anti-fascist resistance, than in West Germany, where confronting the Nazi past involved more complex reckonings with guilt and complicity. Modern historians have worked to place the Trümmerfrauen in a more nuanced context, acknowledging both their remarkable contribution and the political complexities surrounding their memory. Their story has become part of ongoing debates about how societies remember difficult pasts, and which narratives receive prominence in national memory. Yet beyond these scholarly debates, the fundamental reality remains. When Germany faced its darkest hour, it was largely women who began the physical process of rebuilding from ruins. The story of the Trümmerfrauen represents a largely overlooked chapter in Reconstruction history, one where women's manual labor, ingenuity, and determination transformed apocalyptic destruction into the foundation for new beginnings. Their contribution goes beyond the physical clearing of debris. They created the preconditions for Germany's economic miracle that would follow in the 1950s. Without their work, the rebuilding of infrastructure, housing, and industry would have been delayed by years or even decades. The Trümmerfrauen worked not just with bricks and mortar but with hope, the belief that something new could emerge from devastation. They embodied a particularly human response to catastrophe, the instinct to clean up, sort through the damage, and begin again. Their legacy lives on not just in the physical cities they helped rebuild, but in the example they set of resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. As one former Trümmerfrau put it in a 1980s interview, "We did not think about making history. We thought about making tomorrow possible. The Trümmerfrauen of post-war Germany embody one of history's most remarkable stories of civilian resilience and reconstruction. From the apocalyptic ruins of defeated cities, these women, spanning generations and social classes, created order from chaos with little more than their bare hands and determination. They pioneered sophisticated recycling systems born of necessity, transformed themselves into skilled construction workers, and developed leadership capabilities that challenged traditional gender roles. Their work transcended mere physical labor. It was an act of reclaiming dignity and possibility from the ashes of catastrophe. Though their story has been subject to political reinterpretation and contested memory, the fundamental truth remains. When Germany's future seemed impossible, these women made tomorrow possible, brick by brick. Their legacy reminds us that history's grand narratives often depend on the unheralded work of those who, faced with devastation, simply began the patient work of rebuilding. In a world still marked by conflict and destruction, the Trümmerfrauen offer a timeless lesson about human capacity for renewal and the often invisible role of women in transforming rubble into foundation. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for updates. Your feedback is appreciated. We hope to see you again.